Hi there, my name is CeeCee, also known as CeeCee3PO here on YouTube. Chris found me when I was talking about art prints on my friend Casual Nerd Problems channel and asked me to do a video. I've never done a recorded video before. I'm typically doing live streams like Rogues Gallery Live, so if I sound a little uneasy, that's probably why. But I also do a show on kind of like my home channel, Rogue16, called Hot Off the Press, which is focused only on art prints. I mainly collect Star Wars and Batman art prints. I will throw in a random sci-fi one. I'm a huge Blade Runner fan. Other comic books like V for Vendetta and Watchmen. I mostly collect art prints. I also am really big into prop replicas, something I would love for Chris to start collecting once he gets the Bat Bunker taken care of. I think that would be fantastic. But yeah, so obviously I appreciate Dan Default and how he displays his art prints. I really was inspired by his collection tour. What I also loved about seeing his collection was that we have some parts of our collections that are alike because it's focused largely on art prints, not just statues. But also there's huge ways in which our collections are different. So I thought what better way to kind of introduce myself would be to show off some of my favorite Batman prints that are currently in my collection. I'm always looking for more, and I've been very fortunate in that I've been collecting art prints since 2015. And last I checked, I think I stopped counting at around 80 art prints. Not all of them are big though, and I've been at this for a long time. It's also easier to collect art prints and hoard art prints than it is to collect something like statues. So if you've ever been interested in art prints or collecting Batman prints, I hope this can inspire you to look further into that world too. So without further ado, let's get started. Like I said, the print show that I do on Rogue16 is called Hot Off the Press, play on words, because I'm also a huge Star Wars fan, despite all the Batman you see behind me. But the first one that kind of kicked off my art print collecting journey, if I'm quite honest, I found Matt Ferguson via, technically it was a Star Trek print, which my friends laugh about to this day, that it was a Star Trek print that brought me down the rabbit hole of art collecting. But this one by Matt Ferguson, I'm a huge Matt Ferguson fan. He is the artist that's most represented in my collection. I think I've got about 10 or 11 art prints just from him alone. This one was inspired by The Killing Joke and the art of Bryan Boland. I understand that some people think that art inspired by comic books, you might as well just get the art from the comic book artists themselves. But I do think that inspired art like this is not something that people should overlook in their collections. So this is the regular edition of this print. It came out in 2016. It is on the smaller side, which I appreciate, knowing that I'm running out of wall space. This is 18 by 24. So the regular edition, this one, has the 20th anniversary coloring as far as the kind of purple and blue hues. That's the kind of coloring that I was introduced to when I first read The Killing Joke, not the more autumnal tones of the original when it was released in the 80s. That being said, I'll show you something that's very similar to that in a second. That's a very pride and joy in my collection. This one is one that's still to this day very popular with collectors. You don't see them very often. People don't let them go very often. But it's one of those, if there's a fire in my apartment, what am I reaching for? And this is certainly one of them. Now, some people think this is gimmicky, but this one does have a glow-in-the-dark layer. I think it's very subtle. So it's not something that if you turn the lights off, you won't be able to sleep if it's something like a bedroom because it's so bright. But the inset that you see there with the ha-has and the green is what the glow-in-the-dark layer looks like on this art print. I will say the one I like the most of this is not the regular, but actually the variant. This one was even more limited. I think the variant, they only did maybe 60 of them, but mine is an artist proof signed by Matt Ferguson, so it's one of, I think, 25. This is, if you're an old school comic book reader or collector, you'll recognize this coloring. this will be a little more familiar to you. And I do think the story behind it is pretty funny. If I remember correctly, the colorist kind of went overboard when Brian Boland said he was thinking of autumnal tones. I don't think he was thinking this autumnal and this bright as far as the yellows go, but this piece stands out in my collection. Like I said, I have a lot of art prints. The wall that this is on is going to have a lot of art, but yet my eye is constantly drawn to this above all else. So definitely, it's probably, I don't know if I feel like I'd be cheating on my other art prints if I said this is my favorite art print of my collection, like of all time, but I'm certainly close to saying that with this one. The details on this are fantastic. That's not going to come across on screen. But if this is one that you see come across your collecting habits and addiction, if you could grab it, I would wholeheartedly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the comic. So for me, I'm a huge Alan Moore fan. I'm a huge Killing Joke fan. It is my favorite story. And Matt Ferguson is one of my favorite artists. So this was a match made in heaven. And I'm so grateful that I was able to get this so close to so early in my art collecting career. I don't know if I'd collect as many art prints as I do if I didn't find stunners like this so early on. So the next one I have, so this one's an interesting one. When I first got it, I didn't think it would be one of my top favorites, but I think it is one of my top favorites because it is so different. So this is the variant edition. He called it the League of Shadows edition. And it was released also in 2016, just like the Killing Jokes. This one's also larger. It's 24 by 36. So this is the variant. The regular edition is very blue and white with the snow. You see the blue kind of hallucinogenic flower in the foreground, and then the background you see the temple, like the League of Shadows. Here, the colors are off the wall. We never saw anything like this in the Nolan trilogy as far as the tones. The League of Shadows is burning in the background, and you could just barely make out the hallucinogenic flower in the foreground. I will say these colors are very on par with what I love as far as rich jewel tones, but kind of like my headcanon, I'd like to think that the reason why this variant looks so different from the regular is that the hallucinogenic flower could cause some kind of hellscape looking scene like this that we never really got to see in the movie. So I think that's what the artist Kevin Wilson, if I didn't say, this is Batman Begins by Kevin Wilson. He's another great artist to follow. I have a few of his pieces. I don't have as many as I do with Matt Ferguson, but he's done a lot of really popular IPs as well as far as Batman. He's done a lot of great Harry Potter works. So like I said, this is just very unique. And I also always respect a variant that looks so different and is such a departure from the regular edition. And he really nailed it with this one. And next up I've got, so just to show you a little bit of my collection, I do have some wall space, and that's not typical. I'm working on filling that, but this is how that Kevin Wilson print looks, and it happens to be in the same kind of corner as my Killing Joke from Matt Ferguson. And of course, you could kind of orient yourself, so that print is actually right behind me, right there. And of course, I've got the Batman premium format. I don't have a lot of statues. I'm trying not to get a lot of statues. But yeah, these art prints really do stand out on these walls amongst a lot of others. And next I've got, so this is the one that Chris really appreciated. It's actually only one of the few that I have from comic book artists. So Jock is Infamous. This was released in 2017. Every version is signed. So this is the variant. The variant has the red background. The regular had the white background as opposed to the red, but all of them were signed by Jock. I think these were released via Zavi as opposed to a traditional art gallery, but I have it hang up in my wall at work. I think I'll show you that picture in a second. This is based off of All-Star Batman #9, I want to say, and I love it. It's a real showstopper. There are details that are not going to come across on screen, obviously, but there are some, I don't want to say paint splatters, but there's some messiness around the edges that I think you can only really appreciate in person. But I think I have 2 art prints by Jock, this one, and then one that he did, a Star Wars one that was quite popular, called Too Strong for Blasters, where it's Luke and an AT-AT. But this is, I mean, I don't think it gets much better than this, especially it was a beautiful comic cover. Don't get me wrong. I don't have the CGC, but I think if you have the option, if you do find this, the regular is harder to find, actually. When I bought this, the variant was the only thing that I could really find after searching for it for a few years. But it's, I mean, come on. It's just, I think I did a great job in putting that on such a stark white wall. My office was pretty boring dystopian landscape before I added this there. And the print next to it, the Darth Vader, is by Rad71. That's also a screen print, and that one's also signed by the artist. But yeah, I think you can almost make out the signature. Jock has quite a large signature, I found, in the bottom right corner there. And next up, I've got... So this one is called Silent Night by Matt Ryan Tubin. I was not familiar with Matt Ryan Tubin until 2020, and I'm so glad that he did this art. So I think he had done a Catwoman print before this one, but this one really just stood out to me. Obviously, it's based off of 89 Batman, and Matt Ryan Tubin tends to do more scary movies on the classic like horror movie genre, and I think you can honestly see that in this print. This is one that I knew I loved it the second I saw it, but again, amongst a wall of different art prints, is the one that my eye is drawn to the most. I just think that he just looks so brooding. I think he's just a very talented artist, and like I said, this is not... I don't think I would have been drawn to his work before had he not done something Batman related. I have another one from him since then that I've gotten, so I'm happy to continue following his work. This is actually the variant, and I will say, I mentioned the Kevin Wilson Batman Begins, the one you see kind of behind me, how the regular and the variant look so drastically different. This is one where the variant looks very similar to the regular. So even on computer screens, you might not be able to tell the difference, but this variant is a true black and white. It's kind of like a warm black and white with the pops of yellow. The regular was more of a kind of bluey toned black and white. So still not a lot of color, but it definitely had like a bluish tinge to it. I tend to go for something more like this, like the true black and white. I actually have a whole room of just black and white art prints with pops of color, and that's what this one is in. And of course, a lot of Batman prints in there as well. But yeah, this is just... I hadn't found an 89 Batman print I really appreciated until I saw this one. I've gotten a few since then, but this one still takes the cake as my favorite. And next up I have... So this one is... You know what? I think Francisco Francavilla is typically known as a comic artist. So I was wrong, I guess. So I've got Jock, and then of course this one. This is a relatively new one. This was released last year. It was a timed edition. I went pretty hardcore on the Batman prints. I think before I'd even saw the movie, I had at least one that I had nailed down. And then I saw the movie, and then it kind of got worse from there, and set me off a path where I started diving more into different Batman prints, because it's almost like I felt like I was cheating on the Dark Knight trilogy, which is really my favorite. But I think this is stunning. This is the regular edition with what they would call probably like a French vanilla border and text to it. I think the variant was only a little different. This is a screen print, if I remember correctly, as opposed to a giclée. But the variant, I think the colors were flipped. So the background that you see, like where the moon is, was red, and then most of Batman's silhouette himself, he was that kind of like grayish, bluish gray color that you see the moon surrounding. This is a larger one. It's 24 by 36, and I think it was also quite popular. It took a few months. This is also one of the few prints I have from Mondo. And I haven't mentioned that before. So if you were interested in any of the prints you see here, I would probably describe them as either alternative movie posters is a good way to search online for them, but also as far as the galleries that I tend to gravitate towards, it's mostly places like Bottleneck Gallery, some Mondo, but very few Sideshow. And I think most statue collectors are familiar with Sideshow because it's kind of a one-stop shop. They've worked with some fantastic artists, but for whatever reason, Bottleneck Gallery has a lot of my money. The only reason why Mondo doesn't, I want to say it has maybe something to do with the work that they put out, just isn't typically to my style. But also, it can be pretty hard to obtain Mondo prints just because that gallery is so popular. The prints tend to sell out in minutes. Bottleneck Gallery does the same thing, but their customer service is fantastic. And once you get into art prints and you kind of understand the popularity and how fast these prints can go, it's really, it shouldn't be that intimidating. But it's certainly not like statues, unless of course we want to consider them like the recent premium format Poison Ivy that sold out pretty quickly. Prints tend to sell out within like a few minutes or hours because they're a lot more limited. This one was timed, which was great because it was a popular one. Timed typically means that they'll have them available for a certain amount of time. They'll put them up, and then they'll say you have within like 36 to 72 hours to order, and then once the 36 hours is over, they close it. They'll print as many as they sell within that time frame, which is great because it means that everyone who really wants it is going to get a chance to get it, as opposed to most prints like that Killing Joke I told you. I want to say the variant was limited to 60. So you can imagine how fast something like that sells out when you have more than 60 people who want it, and it goes live on the website and it's just gone pretty quickly. So timed releases I think are a great idea for something like this that were very popular with fans, so that no one really lost out. And next up, so this one I wanted to include. It is a favorite. It is one of my favorites, absolutely. But the reason why I thought this one was so interesting and I want to include it is, so this is obviously Batman Returns, and the artist is Phantom City Creative, and this is again a relatively new one. It was released in 2022. Again, large, 24 by 36. So this is the first Batman Returns print that had likeness rights for all of the actors. So if you've ever noticed, if there's like an 89 Batman print that you like and Michael Keaton just doesn't look right, or maybe Michelle Pfeiffer doesn't look right, or Danny DeVito, it's typically been because those actors have not given the rights to their likeness, just like in the statue licensing world. Some likenesses are more expensive than others, and I don't know how that works too much in the art print world, but I do know that this was the first art print I had certainly seen from the kind of like 89 Batman, or Batman Returns, where it featured more than just Michael Keaton, if that makes sense. I've seen ones that feature Michelle Pfeiffer. I say air quotes because sometimes it doesn't necessarily look like Michelle Pfeiffer, or you might see what looks like Catwoman, and then you see Batman, but his back is turned, and it's a silhouette. It's typically like a likeness issue. Again, I'm not an expert in that, but I did think it was fascinating, and I love Easter eggs like that. Some art prints they can't use branding, like if they're holding a Coca-Cola can, they might have to change the name. They can't feature Coca-Cola if they don't get permission from Coca-Cola to feature it. I'm that kind of nerd. I think that's interesting. So yeah, this one was offered in person through Bottleneck Gallery, actually at a screening of Batman Returns. I think they had like an original, I don't know much about films, but I think it was like a 35 millimeter film reel that they were going to show at this theater. So you could show up at the theater, buy these in person. Whatever wasn't sold, they were kind enough to put on their website. And so I was able to get this. This was the variant. The regular, almost like the Matt Ryan Tubin, was a little more on the bluey side, I want to say. And the variant was the more like warmer black and white, like true black and white. And of course I got that because that's kind of how I roll. And then next up, so this one is very special. Again, relatively new. I got it last year. This is by Gabs. Gabs is not his real name. That's what he goes by. I can't pronounce his real name. This is also the variant. So this one was inspired by Batman, and I say inspired by because, again, it's like that licensing thing. For that reason, he didn't do a lot of these. This originally was a commission, so someone entered into a lottery and were able to get a commission through Gabs. This is one of the ones they asked for a Jack Nicholson Joker. He produced this. I fell in love. It's not every day that I look at an art print that comes up on my phone because I follow all these artists or I follow all these galleries, and I love Gabs's work. He does excellent portraits, particularly. I saw this, I gasped. I needed it instantly. I don't remember how many of these he did. This is the variant. I think this variant was an edition of like maybe 15. It was definitely less than 100. And I think that honestly has to do with licensing issues because it's not licensed. There's nuances as far as they don't want to really profit from them when the license holder is not in on the deal, if that makes sense, almost like custom statues. But again, there were a small number of these, so no improprieties from Gabs regarding his, a future relationship with Warner Brothers. He does do a lot of license work with Batman. He did a fantastic Christian Bale portrait last year, I want to say, or maybe it was earlier this year. So this variant is on the warmer side. So there's more pink to his eyes as opposed to the regular that had a little more blue. I liked the red. I thought it gave him, again, like more life and warmth to him. This is not, I think, a kind of traditionally beautiful print, I must say. He does look like a maniac, but I think that's what makes it all the more stunning. I think it's a real great tribute to Jack Nicholson's work on the movie. And that's all I really had. But thank you for listening to my short TED Talk on some of my favorite Batman prints. And hopefully if everyone's receptive to it, I'd love to come back and talk about more art prints that as they release. So again, thank you for having me. My name is CeeCee, and happy collecting.